Due to the onset of the pandemic in March 2020, the whole world has stopped. While most of us have moved to the online settings, home office, our children, grandchildren, sisters, brothers moved to online education. And many teachers, parents and also students themselves reported that while such a switch to online education might have negatively affected their well-being, they felt worse, and also their academic achievements, they got lower grades. This could be only a top of an iceberg. While the pandemic is over, the possible impact of the pandemic on education is still with us. We still see that some students have lower academic grades and they feel worse, their well-being is lower, but we need to understand possible underlying mechanisms that could explain why is that. And therefore, together with the Neurolab researchers, we investigated two important mechanisms that could explain these possible effects of the pandemic on education. We focused on motivation and self-regulated learning related to online education. During the pandemic, thousands of scientific publications were out on academic achievements and well-being and how they could be affected by the pandemic, as well as how motivation and self-regulated learning could be affected by the pandemic. In order to make use of this literature, we took a specific approach. We used a systematic literature review and used specific criteria to select only those papers that matched those criteria. Namely, we used only those papers which were published until December 2021 and which involved participants aged between 5 and 25 and who were enrolled in educational program during the pandemic and participated in online education setting, at least for a period of time. And thanks to this inclusion criteria, from initially found over 8,000 papers, we were able to select only over 70 papers to our review. Data from over 70 papers that were included in our review delivered really interesting information about motivation and self-regulated learning of teenagers, primary school students, but mostly of university students that were taught online, at least partially, during the pandemic. First of all, we were interested in changes in motivation and self-regulated learning over time. While data on motivation were inconclusive regarding the change in motivation before to during the pandemic, the data that compared two time points during the pandemic showed that there was a decline, a drop in motivation during the first year of the pandemic. However, the results for self-regulated learning were very limited in the number of studies, so we cannot draw any conclusions based on them. Secondly, some of the studies focus on different forms of interventions that were aimed at improving motivation and self-regulated learning in the pandemic context. While for the motivation we found that the most successful intervention was flipped learning, the results for self-regulated learning were very limited, so again, unfortunately, we cannot draw any conclusions based on them. Finally, we found, as expected, that both motivation and self-regulated learning were related to academic achievements and well-being of students during the first time of the pandemic. What do these results mean, especially now, when the pandemic is over? First of all, our results indicated that flipped learning is a very useful tool to enhance motivation of students, and this tool could be used also in the offline educational settings. Secondly, Teachers and parents should pay special attention to the youngest learners from primary schools because they may be the most affected. However, we have the least data on this age group. Finally, we hope that in the future more studies will be published on self-regulated learning, because together with motivation, these two processes are very important for academic achievement and well-being of students.